The avoidant didn't randomly appear in your life. This wasn't cosmic coincidence or bad luck. The avoidant came into your life because something in you was magnetizing them, and simultaneously something in them was magnetizing you. You were a match, but not the kind of match that creates healthy partnership. You were a trauma match. Your unhealed wounds were compatible with their unhealed wounds in ways that created intense attraction and devastating dysfunction. The avoidant came into your life because you were broadcasting signals, unconscious signals from your attachment history, from your childhood wounds, from your patterns around love, that the avoidance system recognized as familiar. And familiar, for people with trauma, feels like home even when home was painful, even when home was where wounds were created in the first place. The avoidant was drawn to you because something about your energy, your patterns, your way of relating triggered recognition in their nervous system that said, this person is safe in their unsafety, familiar in their dysfunction, someone I can recreate my original attachment dynamic with. And you were drawn to them for exactly the same reasons. The match was trauma recognizing trauma, wound finding wound, dysfunction seeking dysfunction, to complete patterns established long before either of you met. Understanding why the avoidant came into your life requires understanding the concept of trauma magnetism. People with unresolved trauma unconsciously seek out partners who will recreate the original trauma dynamic. This isn't masochism. It's not conscious self-sabotage. It's the psyche's attempt to master old pain by recreating it in new contexts, where this time maybe the outcome could be different. Maybe this time the unavailable person will become available. Maybe this time you'll be enough to make someone stay. Maybe this time love will be returned the way it was never returned in childhood. The avoidant came into your life because your trauma was seeking its complement, and their trauma was the perfect fit. You needed someone to prove you could earn love through perfect patience and understanding. They needed someone who would tolerate their emotional unavailability while making them feel desired. Your needs and their needs interlocked like puzzle pieces, creating relationship that felt intense and meant to be while actually being reenactment of your respective childhood wounds. The shock of recognizing yourself as trauma magnet for avoidance is that it requires accepting you participated in creating the dynamic. Not in the sense that you're to blame for their behavior, you're not. They're responsible for their avoidance, their emotional unavailability, their patterns, but you're responsible for allowing those patterns to continue, for staying beyond when you should have left, for accepting treatment that you knew wasn't okay. And you're staying, you're accepting, you're hoping. All of that came from your own trauma, your own wounds that made the avoidance dysfunction feel normal enough to tolerate. The avoidant came into your life because you were ready to receive them. Ready in the sense that your unhealed trauma made you unable to see red flags clearly, unable to enforce boundaries firmly, unable to walk away when walking away was what you needed to do. The trauma magnet in you was active, pulling them toward you while simultaneously pulling you toward them, creating collision that was inevitable given where you both were in your healing journeys, which is to say, not healed at all. The childhood wounds that made you vulnerable to avoidance. The avoidant came into your life because something in your childhood prepared you for them. Not prepared you in the sense of giving you tools to handle them, but prepared you in the sense of creating wounds that made their behavior feel familiar enough to tolerate. If you had a parent who was emotionally unavailable, who was inconsistent in their love, who made you work for attention and validation, the avoidance patterns don't trigger immediate alarm the way they should. Instead, they trigger recognition. This feels like home. This feels like what love looked like when you were learning what love was. The unavailability doesn't register as red flag. It registers as normal. The inconsistency doesn't signal dysfunction. It signals, this is how love works. Your childhood taught you that love is something you earn through being good enough, patient enough, understanding enough. And the avoidant is offering you the same lesson your childhood offered. Keep trying, maybe this time it will work. If you experienced abandonment in childhood, through a parent leaving, through divorce, through emotional neglect, through inconsistent caregiving, the avoidant came into your life to activate that wound. The abandonment wound creates terror of being left, and that terror makes you tolerate behavior you shouldn't tolerate because the alternative, being alone, feels like death. The avoidance withdrawal triggers your abandonment wound, And instead of recognizing withdrawal as information that this person can't meet your needs, you interpret it as challenge you have to overcome. If you can just love them perfectly enough, if you can just be patient enough, maybe they won't leave like everyone else left. The avoidant came into your life because your abandonment wound made you desperate to prevent abandonment at any cost, including the cost of your own well-being. And they sensed that desperation, sensed that you would stay through treatment, others would leave over, sensed that your wound was compatible with their need for someone who would tolerate their unavailability. If you had to earn love in childhood through achievement, or through being easy, or through caretaking others, the avoidant came into your life to let you replay that pattern. You learned love is conditional. You learned you're only valuable when you're useful, when you're not too much, when you're managing everyone else's emotions. And the avoidant offers you the same deal your childhood offered. If you can just be understanding enough of their limitations, if you can just manage your own needs so you're not too demanding, if you can just do all the emotional labor, maybe you'll finally earn the unconditional love you've always wanted. The avoidant came into your life because you're still trying to earn what should have been freely given, and they're someone whose dysfunction requires exactly the kind of earning you've been practicing your whole life. If your worth was questioned in childhood, if you were criticized, if your emotions were invalidated, if you were made to feel like you were too much or not enough, the avoidant came into your life to confirm those messages. When the avoidant tells you you're too emotional, too needy, too demanding, they're echoing what you heard growing up. And instead of recognizing this as their problem, you internalize it as confirmation of what you've always suspected about yourself. You are too much. You do ask for too much. You should be able to make yourself smaller and more acceptable. The avoidant came into your life because your childhood created self-doubt that makes you question whether your needs are legitimate, and that self-doubt is exactly what the avoidant needs in a partner. They need someone who will question themselves instead of questioning the avoidant's behavior, and you're perfectly trained to be that person, the specific traits that made you a match for avoidant dysfunction. The avoidant came into your life because you have specific traits that make you compatible with their patterns in ways that are devastating for you and comfortable for them. The first trait is empathy. You're someone who can see beneath people's defenses to their wounds. You recognize the avoidant's coldness as fear rather than character flaw. You understood their withdrawal as self-protection rather than rejection. And this understanding made you patient with behavior that should have been deal-breaker. The avoidant came into your life because your empathy makes you see them as wounded rather than as choosing to hurt you. And that perception keeps you trying to help instead of protecting yourself by leaving. The second trait that made you a match is your capacity for hope. You're someone who believes people can change, who sees potential rather than just current reality, who thinks that love and patience can inspire growth. The avoidant came into your life because your hope is what they need to avoid consequences for their patterns. As long as you're hoping they'll change, as long as you're seeing their potential rather than their consistent behavior, they can continue being exactly as they are without having to face that their current state is insufficient for relationship. Your hope enables their stagnation, and they sense that about you, sense that you would stay hoping long past when others would have accepted reality and left. The third trait is your tolerance for breadcrumbs. You're someone who can find meaning and sustenance in minimal effort, who can interpret small gestures as evidence of big feeling, who can convince yourself that occasional warmth compensates for consistent coldness. The avoidant came into your life because you have this capacity, because you can take their intermittent reinforcement and stay engaged where others would recognize they're being starved and leave to find adequate nourishment elsewhere. Your ability to survive on crumbs is what makes you a perfect match for someone who's only offering crumbs, who doesn't have capacity for more, who needs a partner who won't require the full meal of emotional presence and consistency. The fourth trait that made you vulnerable to the avoidant is your belief that love means accommodating. You think good partners adjust to their partner's needs, work with their partner's limitations, accept their partner as they are. And all of this is true to a point. But you've taken it too far. You've made accommodation into self-abandonment. You accommodate the avoidant's need for space by accepting consistent distance. You work with their limitations by eliminating your needs. You accept them as they are by accepting treatment that damages you. The avoidant came into your life because you've confused accommodation with love, and that confusion makes you perfect partner for someone whose version of relationship requires you to accommodate everything while they accommodate nothing. The fifth trait is your reluctance to quit. You're someone who commits and follows through. You don't give up easily. You believe in working through difficulties rather than running from them. These are generally positive traits, but with the avoidant, they become trap. The avoidant came into your life because your reluctance to quit means you'll stay far longer than you should, will tolerate far more than is healthy, will keep trying when trying is futile. You see leaving as failure, as giving up, as not trying hard enough. And the avoidant needs someone with exactly this mindset, because their patterns require a partner who will stay, despite every reason to leave. Your commitment is what they exploit. Your persistence is what they depend on. Your refusal to quit is what allows them to never have to change. The role of anxious attachment in attracting avoidance. If you have anxious attachment, the avoidant came into your life, because anxious and avoidant are the most common pairing in adult relationships. The pairing feels magnetic, because each attachment style triggers the other's core wound, while simultaneously promising to heal that wound if only both people tried harder. Your anxious attachment is characterized by fear of abandonment, by need for reassurance, by hypervigilance about the relationship. And the avoidance withdrawal triggers all of these things, which paradoxically increases your attachment to them. The more they withdraw, the more anxious you become. The more anxious you become, the more you pursue. The more you pursue, the more they withdraw. The cycle is self-perpetuating, and both of you are trapped in it because your attachment systems are creating the exact dynamic that keeps you both stuck in your respective patterns. The anxious-avoidant trap is that each of you is trying to get from the other what the other is incapable of giving. You need reassurance that they'll stay, consistency that proves you're valued, emotional availability that makes you feel secure. But the avoidant can't provide any of this without triggering their own core fears about engulfment and loss of self. And the avoidant needs you to be okay with distance, to not need so much reassurance, to be independent enough that they don't feel responsible for your emotional state. But you can't provide this without triggering your core fears about abandonment and not being enough. The avoidant came into your life because your anxious attachment was seeking its complement, and their avoidant attachment was the match. The match guarantees mutual triggering, guarantees dysfunction, guarantees both of you will be living out your worst fears about relationships, while neither of you gets what you actually need. The anxious-avoidant dynamic is also compelling because it creates intensity that feels like love. Your anxiety about whether they'll stay creates obsessive thinking about them. Their withdrawal creates pursuit that looks like devotion. The highs when they're present feel higher because the lows when they're absent are so low. The inconsistency creates drama, and drama creates the neurochemical conditions that brain interprets as passion. The avoidant came into your life because you're addicted to intensity, to the highs and lows, to the challenge of winning over someone who's pulling away. And they came into your life because your pursuit allows them to feel desired without having to be vulnerable, allows them to be wanted while maintaining control through withholding. The dynamic serves both of your dysfunctions while meeting neither of your actual needs. The spiritual bypass that brought the avoidant into your life. If you're spiritually oriented, you might have attracted the avoidant into your life through spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with your trauma. You believed the avoidant was a soulmate, a twin flame, a karmic connection you were meant to experience. You interpreted the intensity as spiritual rather than as trauma bonding. You saw the difficulties as lessons you were meant to learn rather than as red flags you were meant to heed. And these spiritual frameworks kept you in dysfunction longer than you would have stayed otherwise because leaving felt like failing a spiritual test, like missing the lesson, like not being evolved enough to handle what the universe sent you. The avoidant came into your life because you were primed to see relationship difficulties as spiritual growth opportunities rather than as information about incompatibility. When they withdrew, you told yourself you were learning detachment. When they were cold, you told yourself you were learning unconditional love. When they couldn't commit, you told yourself you were learning to release expectation. Every piece of their dysfunction became reframed as your spiritual curriculum, which meant you never had to face that you were simply with someone who couldn't meet your needs and you should leave. The spiritual framework made staying into enlightenment and leaving into spiritual failure, and that framework was precisely what allowed the avoidant to remain in your life far longer than they should have been. The spiritual bypass also manifests as believing you can love someone into healing. You thought your high vibration energy could raise their vibration. You believed your love could heal their wounds. You trusted that holding space for them would allow them to open up. All of these beliefs are spiritual bypassing of the reality that people heal themselves through their own work, not through someone else's love. The avoidant came into your life because you were operating from these beliefs, and those beliefs made you perfect mark for someone whose entire relational strategy is getting others to do the work they refuse to do themselves. You were trying to be their healer, their teacher, their pathway to growth. And they were happy to let you try because your trying meant they didn't have to actually do anything themselves. The codependency that was the true magnet. The deepest truth about why the avoidant came into your life is codependency. You're codependent, and codependency is the trauma magnet that attracts dysfunctional partners. Codependency is organizing your life around someone else's needs while ignoring your own. It's deriving your worth from being needed, from fixing others, from being the strong one who can handle anything. It's being addicted to the role of caretaker, helper, understanding partner who can tolerate what others can't. And the avoidant came into your life because your codependency was broadcasting loud and clear that you would accept the role of doing all the relationship work while they contributed nothing, that you would stay through treatment, others would leave over, that you would make their limitations your problem to manage. The codependency that attracted the avoidant manifests as inability to leave situations that are harming you. You stay in the relationship long past, when you recognize it's not serving you, because leaving feels like abandoning them, like giving up on them, like not being the person you pride yourself on being, loyal, committed, understanding. The avoidant came into your life because they needed someone with exactly this inability to leave for their own good. They needed someone who would prioritize their needs over their own well-being. They needed someone for whom abandoning themselves feels more acceptable than abandoning a partner by enforcing healthy boundaries. Your codependency was exactly what their avoidance required to be sustainable. The codependency also shows up as your identity being wrapped up in being the one who loves the unlovable, who stays when others leave, who sees the good in people others can't see. This identity is what attracted the avoidant because it meant you would make their difficulty into evidence of your special qualities, rather than recognizing their difficulty as incompatibility. The harder the relationship is, the more you can prove you're patient, understanding, capable of unconditional love. The avoidant came into your life because they offered you the perfect opportunity to perform this identity, to be the person whose love is so strong it can overcome any obstacle. Except the obstacle isn't meant to be overcome. The obstacle is information that you shouldn't be in the relationship at all. But your codependent need to prove yourself through staying prevents you from receiving that information clearly. Why understanding trauma magnetism is your path to healing. Understanding that the avoidant came into your life because of trauma magnetism is painful because it requires accepting your role in creating the dynamic. But this understanding is also your liberation. Once you understand that you attracted the avoidant through unhealed trauma, through anxious attachment, through codependency, you can start doing the work to heal those things. And healing them changes who you attract. Healed people don't magnetize avoidance. Healed people see avoidant patterns early and leave before deep attachment forms. Healed people don't interpret unavailability as challenge to overcome. They interpret it as information that this person can't meet their needs. Healed people don't stay hoping for change. They require demonstration of current capacity and leave when capacity is insufficient. Understanding trauma magnetism also releases you from the fantasy that the avoidant was special, that the connection was unique, that you lost something irreplaceable. You didn't. You lost a trauma bond, a dysfunction match, a reenactment of childhood wounds. The intensity you felt wasn't love or soul connection. It was trauma recognizing trauma. Wounds fitting together in ways that felt compelling while being destructive. Recognizing this allows you to grieve the relationship accurately, not as losing a soulmate, but as losing time to a dynamic that was teaching you about your unhealed trauma through making you suffer in familiar ways. The grief is still real, the loss still hurts, but the meaning is different. You're not grieving great love that got away. You're grieving the painful learning experience that finally showed you what needs to heal. The path forward is doing the trauma work so you stop being a magnet for avoidance. This means therapy, specifically trauma-focused therapy that addresses attachment wounds. It means examining your childhood and understanding how early experiences created patterns that make dysfunction feel normal. It means working with your anxious attachment, if that's your style, learning to self-soothe, developing secure base within yourself rather than seeking it from others. It means addressing your codependency, learning to prioritize your needs, developing identity that's not based on sacrificing yourself for others. It means getting comfortable with aloneness, so your decisions about relationships are based on whether the relationship is healthy rather than based on fear of being alone. All of this work is difficult. It's uncomfortable. It requires facing pain you've been avoiding, but it's the only way to change what you attract. The gift hidden in the avoidance arrival. The avoidant came into your life to show you your unhealed trauma. This wasn't their intention. They came into your life seeking their own trauma match. But the effect is the same. They revealed your wounds by triggering them relentlessly. Every time they withdrew, they showed you your abandonment wound. Every time they were unavailable, they showed you your wound around not being enough. Every time they let you do all the work, they showed you your codependency. The relationship was mirror showing you everything that needs to heal. And if you can receive it as mirror rather than as tragedy, if you can use it as information rather than as evidence of your inadequacy, the avoidance presence in your life becomes the catalyst for healing you've needed but have been avoiding. The gift is that you now have a choice. You can see the avoidant as random misfortune, as bad person who hurt you, as the one who got away who you should wait for. Or you can see them as teacher, who showed you through painful experience exactly what needs to heal so you stop repeating this pattern. You can use the pain of this relationship as motivation to do the work you've been avoiding. You can let the suffering become the thing that finally drives you to therapy, to examining your patterns, to healing your attachment wounds. The avoidant came into your life because you were ready for the lesson, even though you didn't know it. And the lesson is, heal your trauma or continue attracting people who will activate it. The choice is yours now. They showed you what happens when trauma remains unhealed. What you do with that showing determines whether their arrival in your life was catastrophe or catalyst. The avoidant came into your life because you were a trauma magnet, because your unhealed wounds were broadcasting signals that their unhealed wounds recognized as compatible. The match was inevitable, given where both of you were. But the match was also temporary, a collision that was meant to teach rather than to last. They came to show you your wounds by triggering them until the pain became unbearable enough that you finally committed to healing. That was the only gift they had to give, and they gave it perfectly through being exactly as dysfunctional as they were. Now the question is whether you'll receive the gift, whether you'll do the healing work, whether you'll change the magnetism so the next person who comes into your life is attracted to your health rather than to your wounds. The avoidants served their purpose. They're not meant to be your future. They're meant to be the teacher who showed you the past you need to heal so the future can be different. Receive the teaching, do the work, change the magnet. And the next arrival in your life will be so different from the avoidant that you'll finally understand viscerally what was wrong with the avoidant all along. Not that they were bad, but that they were a perfect match for who you were when you were still wounded and incompatible with who you're becoming as you heal.